This is the first meeting of the first online conference of the Global Climate Jobs Network. We hope it goes well. We're starting out with talking about strategy, talking about what strategy we have, what strategies we could have for the crisis that we're facing, the multiple crises that we're facing. And we've got four speakers today. We've got Jeremy Brecher, from the Labor Network for Sustainability in the United States. We've got Leonor from Climaximo in Portugal and from the Climate Jobs Campaign in Portugal. We've got Andreas Ytterstad from Bridge to the Future in Norway and Concerned Scientists Norway. And we've got, I hope, he's not here yet, we've got Joshua Mata from the Centro Union Confederation in the Philippines. And with that, and they're going to talk about various aspects of the strategy we face and how climate jobs can be part of that strategy. And Jeremy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
10 minutes for the speaker.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so greetings to all of you. Great to be here with you. It's especially great to be with an international group of participants because global warming is global and the struggle against global warming is going to have to be global. I personally work within the US context, and in many ways I come from a backward country with a backward climate movement and a backward labor movement. So far from presenting a view from the vanguard, this is very much from a place where the labor movement and the climate movement have over the long haul often been at odds, and where overcoming those divisions is still a challenge that we face. A central part of that challenge is what I call the jobs versus environment frame. So in public discourse in the United States, a common way of framing issues is, oh, environmentalists want to protect the environment and labor, unions, workers want to protect jobs. And those are opposite and contradictory objectives and concerns. Whenever there's any kind of issue around environmental or climate issues in the United States, that frame is likely to emerge in public discourse and in the media. So I work with an organization called the Labor Network for Sustainability, which for the last dozen years has been involved in working in the labor movement to, excuse me. Excuse me. Should I go on? Okay.
Yes, go on.
Okay. And in the labor movement, we work to help people in unions and other labor organizations figure out how they can best be involved in the struggle for climate protection. And we work in the environmental movement and climate movement to try to persuade people to understand better what the conditions of working people are and why putting bread on the table is so compelling and critical a need for working people. So I'm going to talk about 5 strategies that we use for changing that job versus the environment frame. First of all, something that I think everyone here understands and probably acts on every day, which is the idea that that we have common interests in human survival and sustainable livelihoods. There are not two groups of people. On the one hand, environmentalists, and on the other hand, workers who have unconnected, opposed sets of interests. Rather, we all need to have a livelihood and we all need a livable planet to live on. And if we don't address both climate and jobs issues, we'll starve together while we're waiting to fry together. So recognizing and framing that common interest is point number one. This point number two is to look for alliances around specific issues. So just for example, and I'm going to go very light on examples, even though many of these I have dozens of examples for, but workers in the transportation industry, just to take an example, have frequently joined, certainly in the United States, and I believe in many other countries, transportation workers have joined with environmentalists and climate advocates to push for shifting from private cars to public transit, which is both a creates large numbers of skilled jobs and greatly reduces greenhouse gases, also local pollution. In the United States, the most polluting polluted areas are poor, often people of color communities, and this reduces that concentration of pollution. I give one other example, which we have many alliances between unions and climate protectors around renewable energy standards. That is saying this year, the electric utilities that sell electricity have to have 30% renewable energy sources. And next year they have to have 35%. The following year they have to have 40%. This kind of rising renewable energy standards has been a very effective area for cooperation between labor unions and environmental groups. So the effects are obviously to shift from fossil fuels to renewables. You have to increase energy efficiency in order to raise those energy standards. And you also create local jobs and reduce local pollution. So third strategy, seek win-win solutions to conflicts. We have a great deal of direct conflict between unions, environmentalists, climate protectors in the United States. Many of these come around pipelines for fossil fuel, oil and gas. Many come around power plants, fossil fueled power plants, and they're often very high profile conflicts that appear as almost on the edge of violence, sometimes in fact violent. And the core need there is for people who are involved in climate protection to work with unions to develop concrete plans for just transition. It's easy to talk about just transition. Oh, we're going to create jobs fixing the climate for all the workers who are losing their jobs. But in fact, there's tremendous cynicism and skepticism about that. And it's necessary that there be real concrete plans as part of every climate proposal and every climate demand. We have that happening in not enough, but in some ways. A good example in the United States was Brayton Point coal-fired power plant in Massachusetts. I talked to the local community, a local community coalition there 3 or 4 years ago, and they were in despair about how they would create jobs for the people who are going to lose their jobs in those in that power plant if they managed to close the power plant. They did close the power plant, and they did create a sort of a local movement for jobs, and actually converted the power plant to a green energy hub, which is now bringing mostly a base for offshore wind, but also for other forms of employment around clean energy, and that is actually happening. And the bottom line is every environmental campaign should have a jobs program, and every jobs or investment program should be designed to address the climate catastrophe. Number 4, support a broad public agenda for creating full employment by converting to a climate safe economy. This is the broad concept of the Green New Deal. There are many different versions of the Green New Deal, but basically I am defining it as climate protection that creates good jobs and social justice.
Jeremy,
Yes.
2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go.
Great. Okay. Now, number 5 is start building the Green New Deal from below. We don't have to wait for national governments and national policy to start building the alliance between labor and climate protectors, or to start actually beginning the kinds of projects that are embody that alliance and embody the need for protecting the climate and creating jobs and justice by doing so. The Green New Deal from below, as I call it, is actually happening. And I'll just give one example from maybe 30 or 40 that I've written about in the last few months in my series on the Green New Deal from below that's on the Labor Network for Sustainability website. So in one town in the US, it's Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a old industrial suburb outside of Boston. There was a union coalition that was formed because there was an anti-union city government, and they formed a coalition led by the construction unions, and they joined together with the rest of the unions, but no environmentalists in the coalition. And then a handful of environmentalists started showing up for their meetings and say, you know, we got a lot to talk about here. We have some common interests here, and began developing a program that was a Green New Deal from below climate jobs type program. And eventually they took the city plan for climate protection and converted it to a climate jobs and justice program. And now they persuaded the city to invest in climate jobs, and they are using money that they can get from the state and from the new federal programs we have in the United States to create
Jeremy, 30 seconds now.
Okay, climate jobs program. And so the bottom line of this is that these kinds of efforts can become the building blocks for a national Green New Deal and for a global Green New Deal. And that's my idea of a strategy for climate jobs and the climate jobs movement.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. That sets it out beautifully. Leonor, the next speaker is Leonor Canadas. I hope I've pronounced your last name right, Leonor. I've known you for it seems a long time, but Leonor Canadas, who is from Climaximo, the climate activist organization in Portugal, and also from their climate jobs campaign. Take it away, Leonor.
Yeah, I have sound now. Thank you, Jonathan. Canadas, but it's okay. I'm used to that. And yeah, as Jonathan said, I'm part of Climaximo, which is a grassroots climate justice organization from Portugal, where I've been especially active in the climate jobs campaign. And for the last months, I've also been involved in the global network of climate jobs, also helping organize this conference. And so thanks a lot everyone for being here, and also special thanks to everyone who helped organizing this conference, and some of them you'll see throughout the conference, but others are taking very important roles behind the scenes. So I want to also send my appreciation to them. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And I wanted to start by actually saying that when me and Jonathan first met to talk about this conference, I asked him, because he had already been thinking about it for a while, what do we want the goal of this conference to be? I asked Jonathan that. And he told me, we want to show people what we are fighting for. And that is absolutely right. And it's extremely important, because we know that in order to stop climate collapse, we'll need a very strong mass movement that unites working people, peasants, activists, and scientists all over the world. And that movement needs to know what it is fighting for. We need a movement that has, first of all, the capability to create its own program on how to tackle the climate and social and economic crisis we live in, because we no longer have time for empty promises on net zero bullshit, sorry my language. We need to cut real emissions at a massive scale urgently. So the movement itself needs to have a political program for how to do this. And second of all, a movement that has the power to fight for its own program and to win it. So concerning the creating the program itself part, climate change programs are these programs. They link the social and economic crisis to the climate and environmental crisis, demanding the creation of millions of new, dignified, good jobs in key sectors for the transition. So these are jobs that will have a direct impact on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. These are jobs created in the public sphere on the optic of public service, and that guarantee professional requalification and priority to employment for workers in polluting sectors. And we know the climate crisis is a class struggle, and the solutions to this crisis are socialist solutions. And governments are the only institutions capable of making the kind of investment necessary and implementing such a program. So we need to create a movement that can replace the current governments that are full of empty promises and false solutions, and that are protecting currently the interests of private capital, with people and parties and movements who will carry out the necessary work to cut these emissions and to transform society. And I think climate jobs campaigns can play a huge role in building this movement. And having a program that lays down the work that needs to be carried out in order to cut emissions gives us the political legitimacy to fight. And activists that have been in direct actions blocking coal mines, oil refineries, coal power plants, whatever, they know that we often face resistance, even physical resistance, from workers and communities, because these communities currently depend on this fossil infrastructure. So I understand that kind of resistance. But I also think that the movement should keep on doing these kinds of actions, because changing the system demands disrupting the status quo. But I think that entering a coal mine or whatever infrastructure we're talking about, with a climate jobs program in our hands, a plan for a real just transition gives way more power to our disruption. And it shows people what we are fighting for. And it lays the ground for more workers and communities to take part in discussing, creating, and fighting for these programs. And this is important because we need to stand with working people everywhere. And we need working people, as we've said, on our side, so we can enhance our power to fight and win. And that is why we need climate jobs campaigns that bring together labor and climate and other civil society organizations. And this is a fight for life in which we stand against, as we know, very powerful actors, institutions and corporations, which are very well coordinated at the global level. So this brings me to another point. I think the movement also needs to be coordinated at the global level, because this is, as Jeremy also said, it's a global problem and it's a global task that we have ahead of us. And while it is true that we need to be creating local struggles for just transitions and climate jobs, we also need to coordinate and organize at a global level. And that's why we're here today, because we ought to allocate resources and time in our organizations for the coordination of our local strategies at a global level. We need climate jobs campaigns everywhere, coordinating to build power internationally. And I also think that we, climate jobs campaigners, union members, labor organizers, climate justice activists, etc., that are organizing around the climate jobs idea, need to also be looking around to understand how to best adapt our plans to the needs of the rest of the climate justice and other social movements, so that we are working together and not against each other. And so I actually wanted to give an example. In Portugal this summer, we had a climate camp close to the town of Sines. And this camp, among other things, was meant to organize a direct action in the oil refinery in Sines, which is actually the infrastructure in Portugal that is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions. So parallel to the organizing of the camp and the action, there were, of course, a lot of talks to workers, unions, community members, etc. And a lot of events were organized previous to the camp itself. But there was also simultaneously taking place the preparation of a report on a just transition for Sines, so the town where we were going. And this study case and the articles that originated it took at least 6 months to be ready, and they were presented for discussion and comments to activists, union members, community members, etc. But having the report just transition to Sines that took place within the framework of the climate jobs campaign in the camp and in the action itself was really powerful.
Leonor, 2 minutes to go.
It really allowed us, it really showed us and allowed us to show others what we were fighting for, and that our fight is everyone's fight, and it is a fight for life, for dignity, better jobs, justice, and a better society for all. So it really gave us the legitimacy to go to that oil refinery and say, this needs to shut down by 2025. But we have a plan for a just transition directed by climate science towards social justice and led by workers and the communities. And we need to fight for this plan together. So that was really powerful to talk to workers and to people in the streets and to union members about the plan and engage with them, showing the plan itself. And to finish, I just wanted to say that I think that currently there is a lack and a deficit of imagination and ambition in the climate justice movement that often stops us from planning big. So hopefully this conference might help us to dream big, make ambitious plans, and create a stronger movement and a stronger climate jobs movement capable of fighting for our own programs and plans. So yeah, thank you for your attention, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ambition. Yes. Next, Andreas Ytterstad. I can't remember whether you're the vice president or now the president of Concerned Scientists Norway, but also one of the founders of Bridge to the Future, the Norwegian oil and climate activism organization. Up to you, Andreas.
Thank you. So I've understood that I think I told you president before, but that was a bit presumptuous. I know it's called chair. I was a vice chair. Now I'm chair, but I'm kind of, whichever you want to put it. And yes, it's true. I've been working with the Bridge to the Future Alliance. I won't say so much specifically about the situation in Norway because a comrade from the General Union of Municipal Employees will speak a little bit about building climate jobs campaigns in the next session. So Mette Haugen, I'll leave to her to explain a little bit more about the Norwegian situation. But I will start with one particular, well, it's a Norwegian thing, but I think it's a global thing as well. And it's kind of informed by this idea that I've had in the back of my mind at least for 10 years, maybe 15 when it comes to climate change, which is that the argument of power, the power of the argument is not as important as the argument of power. And I mean, this is, I think that most climate activists around the world feel that we have this urgency to do something. We have some really good arguments. We might even have some good plans and ideas on how to do it, but how do we mobilize the kind of social power to make this happen in time? I mean, this is the really, really pressing thing. But this old thing with the power of the argument, I don't know whether it was Hegel or Marx, I don't remember who coined that phrase first, but particularly now with the power crisis, which is one of the many crises that we have kind of on top on and the side of the climate crisis. I mean, Tony Clark is one of the originator of the Canadian climate jobs campaigns. He put it in his book how the climate crisis is a threat multiplier, how it kind of multiplies other environmental crises, the focus on the nature crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the food crisis, the electricity price crisis, the power crisis, the crisis with the war, and so on and so forth. Makes the I mean, I think there's a growing recognition. My kind of scholarly field is journalism, and I think that even within mainstream journalism, you'll see op-eds and news stories that somehow relate the electricity crisis, the food crisis to the climate crisis. So this idea that the climate crisis is the underlying thing is there, but to get immediate action on climate change is not as easy as it was over the corona crisis, where you had daily press conferences where you kind of dealt with and where the state kind of mustered some will and some money and some measures to make things happen. So the climate crisis is there, it's an underlying thing, but we can't quite put it to the front of what we do, although there's a growing understanding how the climate crisis increases the other crisis. So one thing we did do in Norway for the Bridge to the Future conference that we had this year was that I often write op-eds, but I very seldom write them alone. And this is partly because I feel that this just having a good argument, in the paper or whatever, isn't as important as having it together. So I can have bishops and trade unionists, environmentalists, and if it's a long group of 15 signatories, that's where I'm more interested in writing up an op-ed. So we did an op-ed which we read out aloud to the minister that attended our yearly conference this year, saying that we cannot let another crisis postpone the climate crisis. And we were thinking specifically about the war with Ukraine at the moment. No more wasted opportunities. And it was a good thing to have trade unions leaders, environmental leaders say that jointly. And this is, I think, that's something that we really need to work with, how to include our response to the other and apparently more immediate crisis, to the climate crisis, and do that continuously. My second point is really a little bit following from what Leonor was saying here, in terms of, I mean, when Greta Thunberg sailed into New York for the Climate Action Summit, supposedly in New York, 2019, she said those words: no more nice words, we want a concrete plan. And I think having concrete plans both at a national and at a local level, like Jeremy has been speaking about, and also that Leonor has been speaking about, is very, very important, to have those specific fights that people have for their jobs in the here and now connected to this broader fight for a transition. I mean, this is where the metaphor of the bridge to the future in Norway makes sense to me. It's a bridge between the immediate needs that you have and the needs that we have as a species, as on a local level, but to a national and on a global level, to have a safe environment around us. But I think it's worth remembering, even though I agree with Leonor that the kind of big initiatives that kind of lifts the response to the climate crisis to the level that it was in public attention during the school strikes in 2019, sometimes seem a long way. But I think that what you're doing with the CNES sector is very important, because we have to remember that, I mean, the UK campaign itself was had a very good beginning in 2009, because there was an occupation of the Vestas factories, the wind turbine factory in the UK that was supposed to be closing. And then you had 20-odd workers occupying the facilities. And then you had a kind of general argument about climate jobs coming together with a very concrete struggle. So I think this is always the challenge, the strategic challenge that climate jobs campaigns in any countries face, which is to have this kind of general program for a transition being connected and being fought for by workers, basically, by workers. I mean, our big problem is that we have these really good ideas about how we can move towards a future that is livable for everybody, but we need social force behind it. And I think that the concrete plan of climate jobs, whenever it is connected to struggles, I mean, the Vestas struggle didn't actually win, but it inspired ideologically the start of the climate jobs campaigns in the UK. And I think perhaps some of the struggles in CNES haven't quite perhaps won, but being constantly on the lookout and, for those kind of struggle, having those connections between the concrete struggles and the concrete alliances that Jeremy was talking about, and connecting it to a broader program for climate jobs, that is really the way forward for all of us. I think I can leave it at that, actually. So you don't have to say 2 minutes to me, Jonathan.
Okay, I was just about to say 2 minutes to you. Thank you very much for being concise.